We're about to test a new setup. And I'm going to go live now. I think y'all should be able to hear me. So this is going to be the July 2025 CAHS Herp Society meeting, Central Arkansas Herp Society. And just a little bit of intro into the meeting. I'll start with a little bit of herps in the news. So y'all might have heard about the alligator motorcycle impact in Florida. We have a pretty cool pygmy rattlesnake called alluring video that we're going to share with you. And Abilene Zoo had some Mangshan pit vipers that had laid eggs, so that's some good news. And we had Snake Day and Snake Week presentations from several groups this last week that you could join in on, and we might have other news, so we have a question mark there for you. So this is just a little bit about the Orange City, Florida situation where a couple of motorcyclists managed to hit an alligator. Unfortunately, we don't know the information on whether or not the gator survived. Thankfully, both people did. So this is from the Associated Press on June 2nd, 2025. And I'm going to go right into a caught alluring video of a pygmy rattlesnake one of our group members, Taylor Christenberry, has shared with us. And if you notice, the pygmy rattlesnake is caught alluring there. And there's a skink that's kind of interested in what's going on. And so a lot of people think the rattles on a rattlesnake's just for an aposematic reaction to kind of scare off predators, but actually it has an interesting evolution that, at least in part of its evolutionary tract, it's been used as a caudal lure. And then in slow motion, you can see as the lizard goes, good bite straight onto the head, and a prey capture. And we'll have a link on the Facebook page if you'd like to see it there again. So just a neat little observation to share with you on pygmy rattlesnakes. And then on June 25th at the Abilene Zoo, they shared on their Facebook that the Mangshan pit viper has laid eggs. Some sources say there's fewer than 500 remaining in the wild. Sampling on such a species, it's probably difficult, and probably opinions will probably vary on that. But there's been quite a few of these in captivity since the early 2000s, and so hopefully we'll see more reproduction in this species in captivity as time goes on. So there's not really a whole lot of people here in person for any other herp news, so we might save that for later. As far as group information, Josh, our treasurer, he is currently at home. He has to take care of a situation there at his house today, which is fine. That's no problem at all. And so we'll do a treasurer report on the next meeting. We had a good herp show this last week. We had over a page of new people signing up for our mailing list, and so we're going to go ahead and start getting that set up for now. And we're going to start setting up the camera and everything for a presentation from a guest speaker, Jeff Snodgrass, and he's going to be talking about the invisible arc and the role that people and zoos and various entities can play in captive reproduction and conservations of animals. And so please bear with me while we go ahead and get some of this set up, and I'm going to go ahead and pause this and change the camera over.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jeff Snodgrass. Arkansas Herpetological Society. I've been involved with this society for about 25 years. I believe Randall Berry is the one who started it several decades ago. President of it for several years in the late 90s. And I've been out for a while. I've had some severe health issues and haven't been involved as I'd like to be in recent years. A little background. Wildlife biology degree from Columbia University. Went to grad school at Florida State and received my master's degree also in environmental wildlife biology. My focus there was the microecological habitats of endangered species. At the time, primarily dry marcon, Cooperide, eastern indigo, and Cyclora species, the rock iguanas of the east and west Caribbean. My primary focus since 1976 as a kid have been eastern indigo. I started working with them when I was 10 years old and produced them for the first time when I was 15. And it's just a ball that I've continued to keep rolling. They were the first reptile amended to the Endangered Species Act of 1973. And over the years, there have been a broader amount of dry marcon brought into the country from Central and South America, and I've absorbed those into my collections as well. As far as the eastern indigo, a lot of projects have been surrounding them. Probably the most popular right now is Project Oriana. They were the second major project to try captive breeding with the thought of captive wild repatriation. For the first several years, the program came to a stall because they simply weren't able to produce them in captivity. About 2 years into their program, I got a call from the director of Project Orion at the time, and I was asked to come speak to the group about what my thoughts were that may be going on, since I'd been captive breeding them for decades. After talks with the group and listening to their lectures, I think they were kind of overthinking everything. And the primary problem that I found was their captive diet. They were following an AZA protocol for their captive diet, which was rodent only inclusive. They weren't giving them a varied diet. Dry marcon as a whole don't primarily feed on mammals in the wild. I've observed them for decades, and it's very rare to see them take a mammal. They're opportunistic feeders, so they absolutely will take a rodent if they get the chance to. But in their habitat, they primarily come upon turtles, birds, other snakes, lizards, which really make up the bulk of their diet in the wild. And that's across the board with dry marcon, both indigenous species and those in Central and South America. And I found over the years that when you incorporate a strictly rodent diet, that their fecundity seems to go down and their obesity seems to go up. You'll see a lot of pictures of dry marcon online, and a lot of them are just grotesquely obese. And a lot of that is because of this high rodent diet. And they are endless feeders. They will eat every day if you give them the opportunity to. They're always hungry. And it's a high metabolism snake, a very active snake. And people who keep them in small cages or keep them in tubs, they have an obesity problem with their animals. These animals aren't getting the exercise they need or the stimulation they need, and they're generally overfed. So really the key to captive propagation, high fecundity, and longevity with these animals in captivity is a varied diet. Include fish, include quail, include chicks, and include some rodent fare. Mine get a rodent about once a month. Other than that, they're primarily getting fish, quail, and chicks. And I try to mix that up during the week. During the winter months, I take their feeding down to once a week. In early spring, I build it back up to twice a week. And in summer, I'll feed them 3 times a week. And I get away with this because I don't feed large meals. They don't really not naturally built to take large prey items. Generally, the width of the snake should be your guide to the size prey that you're offering them. Other than that, I mean, like I said, there's a lot of projects going on with these animals. The original one was Dr. Dan Speak out of the University of Kentucky, and he's tried a repatriation project in 1983, 84. And I communicated with him quite a bit back then. And the projects didn't go very well. There wasn't a high level of success with the animals that were turned loose into the wild that we found during field surveys where these animals, we had attempted to repatriate these animals. Project Orion had the same problem. They just weren't getting the fecundity that they wanted. It's why they lost their financial backing initially. And then Project Orion was absorbed into the Dade Miami Zoo, and they took over all the projects. Since then, their repatriation projects have gone pretty well. We've actually found specimens that were released that have grown into adulthood, and we found captive offspring that have originated from these animals that were released years ago. So we're starting to see a level of success with that program. They've also absorbed into the East Highland Snake Group, which is a group I worked with early on, that was eventually absorbed into the Gopher Tortoise Council. Primarily Florida animals. The Eastern Indigo was the one that really ticked it off. And when we realized that the keystone animal for the Eastern Indigo were the gopher tortoises, then a lot of work began with them. Florida right now is like in crisis mode. A lot of the native wild flora and fauna are disappearing at an accelerated rate. A lot of that has to do with fragmentation of habitat, degradation of habitat, and urban sprawl. Gopher tortoises are on the ESA, but Florida is issuing incidental take permits, which allows developers to go in and develop known gopher tortoise habitat. When those habitats are developed and bulldozed, eastern indigo, scrub jays, several species lose their habitat as well. And so it is in crisis mode there right now. Hopefully Florida will wake up one day and realize they can't keep issuing these incidental take permits. You know, we all love money, but you know, at some point you have to protect the habitat around you. And so there's been a lot of work to that degree. Other species that I've worked with, Louisiana pine snakes, that's another one. For years we didn't know if they were endangered or if we just weren't seeing them because they're subterranean habitat. It turns out that they are endangered. I worked with Jeff Boundy, the Louisiana state herpetologist, for some time. And for a while we were asking people, yeah, go out and look for these animals. At the time it was still legal to collect. And get your fishing license, go out, collect some, and pinpoint, you know, give us a GPS marker where you're finding them. And then that changed when they made the ESA, when it was actually determined that they were endangered. And a lot of the problems there tend to be the same thing the eastern ringgoats are facing. It's urban sprawl, urban development, agricultural development is a big hindering process for the Ruthveni, or the Louisiana pine snake. The agriculture has been has given them a big hit as well. Like I said, in grad school, I studied microecological habitats. And what we can do is we can go out and look at a habitat and say, this looks great. You know, this is where we need to start our repatriation projects. And repatriation projects actually fail because we haven't taken a micro look at them. We haven't looked at soil content. We haven't looked at the distribution of prey animals. You know, it's all interconnected. In Louisiana, we found that agriculture and the lumber trade was really the decimation of the Ruthveni habitat. They were cutting down the natural longleaf pine and replacing it with loblolly pine, a faster growing pine, which changed the soil content, which damaged the pocket gopher population, which is the primary feed, primary prey item of the Louisiana pine snake. So those are being addressed. We also found that tomato and watermelon agriculture changes the soil as well. It changes the pH of the soil. So that also had a devastating effect upon these animals. The black pine snake, which recently was admitted to the Endangered Species Act of 1973, that's another one that has faced critical decline because of urban sprawl, fragmentation of their habitat, and collecting to some extent. Collecting does take a portion of the population out of their native range, but I've never really seen it at a level that causes the decimation of a population. They're not always easy to find. It's not like you just walk out into the woods and pick 10 or 12 of them up. Anybody who's done any field herping, especially in the past, can tell you that. It's typically development and agricultural runoff, timber harvesting, like I said, the building of roads, the fragmentation of their habitat, and agriculture, and just urban sprawl. We're seeing that here in West Little Rock where we are now, with the black bear population now infringing upon the neighborhoods in West Little Rock. So, yeah, that's a lot of that is what's happening. Florida continues to lose a lot of its pristine habitat due to development, and we're seeing that happen here in Arkansas as well. Not to the extent many other areas are, but we are seeing it. I brought a couple animals with me. Like I said, I absorbed into my collection a lot of other dry marcon. I work with the eastern indigos, of course, Texas indigos, Mexican West Coast cribos, yellowtail cribos, blacktail cribos, unicolor cribos, and a couple others. And they're not always for the faint of heart. Like I said, they're a lot of work. They a lot of captive maintenance involved with them. They're not a snake that you feed, water, and clean their cage once a week. It's a daily job. They require daily care. They're very prone to dehydration, and that's where a lot of people run into problems with them, especially imported animals. A lot of yellowtails, blacktails, and very few unicolor are still being imported on a regular basis. And we see a lot of problems with them because they don't get the best captive care after they've been captured, moved into their area where they're going to be exported, and then come into the United States where they're held again in substandard conditions, and then finally make their way to their new owners. A lot of them come in very dehydrated, well underfed, underweight, heavy parasite loads because stress allows for their immune system to break down and the parasites to take over. Almost all these animals, even in captivity, maintain a parasite load. And it's managed with good care, good health, and a healthy immune system that can keep these things at bay. But once stressed, things can go downhill very quickly. And another problem is, and I see this across the board with new animals arriving, typically keepers are anxious to see their animals feed. That's the first thing they want to see. That should not be the case. The first thing you want to see your animal do is drink. So it's critical to get these animals hydrated before feeding. They can go much longer without food than they can without water. And a dehydrated animal that's fed is going to take more moisture from their system to process and digest the food item. And it's going to send them into ESRD, end-stage renal disease. And their kidneys will crash very quickly. The animal will appear perfectly healthy and then roll over dead. And that's a trait that comes from almost all wildlife. They're able to hide being sick very well until they're on their deathbed. And so that's a major problem. So always when you bring in a new animal, whether you've had it flown in like most of us do when new animals come in, or you get it at a pet shop or whatever, make sure you see this animal drink. Give it a bath, get it hydrated before you feed it. Give it a week to settle in, and then try feeding it. Don't try to feed it day 2 or day 3. You can cause yourself a lot more problems than you will benefit yourself and the animal. That almost about wraps it up, unless anybody has any questions. We'll get to handling this eastern indigo and this yellowtail cribo I brought.
If you have questions, go on the other side of the mic. I know you do.
I know he's got questions. I think he's too shy to ask.
You asked me 35
Yeah,
questions.
go ahead, ask him a question. What's that in the mic?
As long as you're in front of the mic.
This side?
Yeah.
Yeah. Can you hear me now?
Can you hear me? How many species belong in the genus Dimorquin?
I'm sorry?
How many of the species snakes in the genus Dimarchin?
Of Drymarchon?
Yes.
There are 8 known species
Okay.
of Drymarchon.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Good question. That's a good one.
And actually, the eastern indigo used to be a subspecies. The cooperi was a subspecies. They were Drymarchon melanaris cooperi. And because of their separation from the rest of the complex for so long, and genetic testing that's been done, they declared them their own species. So we've dropped the melanaris, and melanaris is actually the black-tailed cribo, and which all Drymarchon originally were based off of. And we're going to see, I think we're going to see a lot more changes as more genetic testing goes on. It's just getting the funding for genetic testing and getting the work done. And so once that starts occurring, I'm sure we'll see more species, subspecies changes. Taxonomy is actually trying to move away from a subspecies category and try to develop more of a genus species category.
Adam, you got any questions over there?
Yes.
I'm good. And that mic's pretty directional, you almost have to be like right down the barrel for it to pick you up.
Do what?
That mic's pretty directional, you almost have to be like right down the barrel for it to pick you up.
Okay. Okay, any other questions? Any concerns, any ideas? No? Silent group today.
How many are you going to produce this year?
What?
How many are you going to produce this year?
Next year, like I said, I was actually put in the hospice last year. They didn't expect me to make it. And I did bounce back. And so not a lot of breeding this year. I paired one pair of Eastern Indigos and a pair of Yucatan Blacktail Cribos, and that's it. Next year, I plan on pairing a lot more. I'll do more Yellowtails, more Blacktails, more Easterns, more Rubitus, Mexican West Coast Cribo, and probably a couple others. It just depends on how I feel. I don't want to be loaded down with over 100 babies. Drymarchon are not always the easiest to start as babies. They take a lot of work. Usually the babies are in my care for a year to 2 years before I actually send them out, get them fully established on feed. It's funny for a snake that's so crazy about food as babies, it's so difficult to get them started sometimes. But once they associate feeding with a good response, you can't turn them off. Some take a little longer to associate that with a good response.
How many are in a clutch typically? How many are in a clutch typically?
You know, good question. Different species like the Eastern Indigos, I typically see 8 to 12. And then with the unicolors and blacktails and sometimes the yellowtails, I see up to 22. And I've gotten overwhelmed by that before. When I've gotten, 43 unicolor eggs, 40 blacktail eggs, and a measly little 8 with the Eastern Indigos. But when you start breeding multiple animals and you have all these eggs coming in, it can get difficult. And then the real work begins after they hatch, getting all those babies started. It's almost a full-time job. It is.
Once you do have babies, do you have other people that breed other snakes like ball pythons and other lizards that you take? Do you get stillbirth snakes for food?
I do. When they become available, yeah. I have contacted people. I get stillborn boas, ball pythons, other animals, and they readily take those. That's actually one of the best ways to get Drymarchon started is through other snakes. Yeah. I got a friend that's a big breeder in California, and he would clump his babies together right after they were born, because typically we don't even start trying to feed them until they're post-hatch ecdysis, once they go through that first shed. And but he discovered that that's not always the case. He would go check his tubs, and he'd have a couple of really fat baby Eastern Indigos, and notice that a couple in there were missing. So, you can't hold that theory to true. Yeah. Anything else?
Were yours produced here in Arkansas?
I'm sorry?
Were they produced here in Arkansas?
I didn't hear you.
Were they produced here in Arkansas?
Produced in Arkansas?
Yeah, were yours?
Oh yeah, I've been producing them for years here. Yeah. Just don't keep them outside. But
Don't
Yeah.
keep them
In
out.
Florida, I was able to keep them outside when I lived in Homestead.
Plus, it's probably a lot more humid out there
Yeah.
than here.
But in Arkansas, no, it simply gets too hot here for them. You can believe that, South Florida. But typically, these are diurnal animals. They're usually crepuscular animals. They usually come out in the early mornings and in the evenings. You really don't see a lot of them out during the heat of the day. They usually retreat towards burrows and canals or gopher tortoise burrows and other protective areas, or buried down under the pine needle floor in the pine forest there.
So, Jeff, we have a question from Josh Summit. He's our treasurer, and he wants to know, what would you say would be a good entry-level snake if someone wants something similar but not quite ready for something so advanced as dry marcon? Like, what's a poor man indigo?
I would say, yeah, I would say the black milk snake. For years, that was coined as the poor man's indigo, or the Mexican black king coined the poor man's black milk snake. But honestly, I think black-tailed crebos, if you can provide them with the space, that's the key issue. If you can provide them with the space, they're actually a very good beginner's animal. They're easily handleable, they're amicable, they readily take food once they've really gotten started. And I think they're one of my favorite dry marcon at the blacktail. And they're just great animals, and they get very, very large. I mean, I've had one at 9.5 feet. So they do have the capacity to get larger than the eastern indigo. Which the largest dry marcon is the yellowtail. And I've had a couple that have reached the 11-foot mark. And so they have the capability to get massive. They don't always have the best attitude, especially as wild caught. And even some captive bred, tend to be, I won't say aggressive. I never use aggressive when I'm talking about wildlife, but they can be a little hyper defensive. And so they are an animal you have to be careful with. I had an 11-foot unicolor crebo that I shared joint custody with a gentleman in South Carolina. And this guy went back and forth between us for breeding. And he's an 11-foot unicolor. And I let kindergartners handle him. He's a very laid-back animal. And my friend Don one time was feeding him. And he got in a rush because his wife was calling him to dinner. He's feeding him chicken legs. And he tried, last one he hand-fed. And they are sight hunters, but they don't always have the best accuracy. And so this unicolor hit Don in the hand. He ended up with 150 sutures. It did knock on. It hit him and realized it didn't have the right thing and immediately let go and retreated. But yeah, 150 sutures, and the attending ER physician sent him to x-ray to make sure he didn't have a fracture.
I think many of us are probably guilty of that.
Yes.
Just, in a hurry, that's when accidents happen, whether it's snakes or motorcycle riding or any activity you're part of it. So that's,
and I mean,
we're all guilty of that to some level, I believe.
The feeding response with dry marcon can be off the charts. For years, I tub fed them because I didn't want them associating me going into their enclosure with feeding. And it worked very well. They're an animal that you can handle while they're eating. And it doesn't disturb them. They're not going to regurge. But I've quit doing that, so I do have to be careful when I open my enclosure. They will fly out at you. Even when I was tub feeding, I had a large yellowtail crebo, a pair of them, that if I wasn't fast enough with the food, they would come out of their cage and literally chase me, telescope, and chase me across the room. It was funny, but you don't want a big one getting a hold of you because they can do some serious damage. They're pit bulls. They don't constrict. They don't have venom. They literally grab their prey, pound it, and chew it to death, and then swallow it, generally alive. So they are the pit bulls of the snake world. They very powerful jaws, very sharp teeth, and when they put them to use, it's business.
Let's see if there's anybody else with any questions on the live stream. I'm not seeing any other questions, so if you'd like, would you like to maybe show some of your animals to the camera?
Do what?
I said, I don't see any other questions on the live stream. Would you like to show off some of your animals?
Yeah, let's pull some out here.
And I think he's going to go ahead and pull out some animals for us to take a look at.
juvenile yellowtail crebo. He's a year old. Yeah, I remember when they first come out of the egg, they're about 6 inches long, 6 to 8 inches long. And this is a 1 year's growth. And he will, for the first 4 or 5 years, he'll grow approximately 50% per year when they're fed properly. Again, overfeeding can be a problem with these guys. These are the ones that I say be careful with sometimes because they can be hyper defensive. He's been handled since a hatchling, with a lot of regularity, so he's totally calm. That's how I try to raise my yellowtails. I've had some massive ones that were as laid back as this guy is, or this girl. This is a little female. But I'll go ahead and pass her around. Let everybody get a look at her. You can see the ventrals, nice yellowtail, their namesake. And this one will develop more yellow as it matures. And I'm hoping that head will turn solid yellow. I have a few of them that have the solid yellow head.
And Jeff, you might have already said it. I had a little bit of an echo, so I'm having a hard time keeping track. But where do these range naturally?
They're South American. You find them in Paraguay, Colombia, all over South America. And they have phenotypical differences from their range too. We see that with a lot of animals. The black-tailed crebos are an interesting one. I should have brought a couple of those. When you look at the animals from South America, they're a golden animal with a cold black tail. But then as you get northernmost into the range, northern Belize, and then the Yucatan Peninsula of Mexico, you'll notice that their bodies turn a striking red. And of course, they still have that jet black tail. Beautiful animals. I'll come back at some point and bring more. My help bailed on me today. My wife decided to stay home, so I wasn't able to bring a lot.
That's fine. We're happy that you're here and able to talk to us. It's been a while since we've had a guest speaker, so it's
I was even just looking
very much appreciated.
Yeah, let me get a video.
And I apologize for a little bit of echo on the mic right now. We're having to use a room mic, and I don't have it quite
He's
dialed
looking for
in.
food.
But you should be able to hear and understand what we're doing. So I apologize that the audio's not perfect, but hopefully it's coming across.
Yeah. Well, this one's 2 years old.
Hey, man, you freaked it out.
It's an Eastern. This is the one that started it all for me as far as Drymarchon go. Eastern Indigo, Drymarchon cooperi. Did this to Florida, Alabama, and Georgia. The population was thought to be extirpated from Georgia until about 10 years ago when some juveniles posted a picture of themselves holding a big black dead snake. The picture got circulated. Some wildlife biologists were able to see it and realize that what those kids had was an Eastern Indigo. And so a lot of projects started. That's actually what started Project Orion, was when that picture of that dead snake got circulated. There was a young girl named Orion. Her father was a multimillionaire, and she took a real affinity to these animals. And he funded the project for the first 3 years. But like I said, the project didn't really go well. And so he withdrew his funding, and the project was then absorbed by the Dade County Miami Zoo. And they continue to run that program to this day. And they've expanded it to other species as well. Adamantius, Eastern Diamondback, the Appalachia the rattlesnakes, gopher tortoises, several species have been included in their programs. The St. Lucian Bushmasters, the Chichis are also involved, that are involved in their programs now too. So they've really expanded globally, not just in South Florida. And you can see the iridescence in these animals. They look even better in natural sunlight. You'll see purples and blues and reds. And another interesting thing I found with all Drymarchon, when you get them into the sunlight, they develop a scent. It's almost like they smell sweet. If we were to take this animal outside, you took a sniff, and then we took it outside for just a couple minutes, you sniff it again, you would notice a sweet odor to it.
What is that? I mean,
Don't know. We don't know. Haven't figured that out.
So I've heard, and correct me, you probably know this better than I do, but I've heard that boom slings, sometimes their sheds smell like licorice.
I've heard that.
And so
I've not worked with them, but I've heard that.
yeah, I've never kept boom slings, but I've heard that from several people. It smells like licorice, and I've never experienced that. I'm kind of jealous of those that have.
Yeah.
Beautiful, beautiful snake.
Yeah, there's a lot of little things that you discover when you're keeping these animals that that aren't really realized by science. It's funny because private keepers discover a lot with these animals, and private keepers have done a great job with several species in captivity. Think about zoos, and they have such massive collections that they have to maintain. They can't always focus breeding a specific species. But we see a lot of private keepers that focus on one animal or one genus or a small group of animals, and they have a high rate of success with captive breeding. And so zoos are now actually opening themselves up to the possibility of working with privateers. I've been lucky enough, I've done a lot of work with the Brownsville Zoo. Colette Adams there and I have worked with a lot of different species, or incorporated a lot of programs together. Like I said, I've worked with Project Oriane. I've worked with the East Highland Snake Group, the Tortoise Council, and the IUCN Species Survival Programs. I've been involved with almost all of those at one time or another. I would like to do more, but like I said, my health has prevented me in the last few years from being, very active.
That's very cool.
Pretty snake. Gosh, it's gorgeous.
What's the normal age of sexual maturity?
Sorry.
The average age of sexual maturity?
Sexual maturity. My females, I hold back until they're 5. That's just me. I know a lot of people breed at 3 or 4. I think that's too young if you want to maintain long-term fecundity. And males can be ready to go at 2, 3, 3. Yeah. A male that size is ready to breed. I've also found that in dry marcon, females tend to prefer smaller males.
I thought they would eat them.
Yeah. As Morgan just pointed out, do you think it's because of ophiophobia? Like they're scared that they might get eaten if there's a larger male present? Do you think they're more comfortable with a smaller male?
Possibly. So.
It's interesting.
I mean, I've heard stories of people pairing their animals and, cannibalism going on in enclosures. I've experienced it one time. I put a pair of Easterns together, and I happened to be in the herp room, and I heard a little bit of a commotion. Me here, so it had to be loud. And I looked over, and my male had my female's head in its mouth. And it was going to town. Like I said, they swallow them alive. So, yeah. Fortunately, he didn't kill her and then eat her. But I was able to get them separated, and that was fine. She still went on to give me a clutch of 10 eggs, and they were all perfect. Go figure.
So do you think there might be any difference in receptiveness pre and post breeding? Because I've seen with some Bothrops, it's like if you put them together when they're receptive, everything's going to go fine. They're going to lock up. If you wait 2 weeks after that lockup, or they're bred, I think the female knows that she's bred. I think the hormones are changing. You put a male in there, she'll kill it. I've seen that in both rows.
It's possible, but I typically start breeding in October or November, and I pair them up through December.
Wow.
I'll pull them apart. I'll put them together for a week, pull them apart, feed them, leave them apart for another week, and then put them back together. And that was the first instance I ever had a problem, was when that one male tried to eat female. I've had friends that have talked about it with Arabennis, the Texas indigo. I've had a few friends lose animals, females killing the males, males killing the females. I think Arabennis, the Texas indigos, tend to be a little more defensive than the Eastern indigos. I've had a few that had really bad attitudes, and then I've had some that were, puppy dog tame. You just never know. I've probably caught over 100 Eastern indigos in the wild. I was in Florida. Back in the day in Homestead, I would find them literally every day. I found my first one in the backyard. The first week I moved to Florida. And a 7-foot beautiful Eastern indigo in my backyard, scooped it up, ran in the house with it, cleared the whole household. And fortunately, my parents They were pretty cool, and it was actually legal at the time to collect eastern indigos. And so my dad constructed a big enclosure in the carport and put it in there. I was 10, and caught another one, caught another one, caught another one. I ended up with like 3 males and 6 females at the time, and kept them all. And 5 years into keeping them there, I got my first clutch. And I was 15 and was able to incubate them successfully, get the babies started. And at that time, they were on the ESA by the time I bred them, but I was grandfathered in because I'd had these animals since before they made the ESA. And then when I moved to Arkansas, I donated one of my males and 4 of my females to the Miami Herpetarium, the Bill Haas at the time, and brought 2 pair with me back to Arkansas. And they started my Arkansas breeding program. Since then, I've exchanged a lot of animals and have acquired new animals from other people to maintain my bloodline. So I'm not seriously inbreeding these animals. And that's a problem with Eastern Indigo around the country. So many people started breeding them, and there's been so few coming in for the wild. I mean, we technically haven't had a wild Eastern brought into captivity since 1973. So it is a species that is in trouble with inbreeding, and we're seeing some issues with that inbreeding. None of them have been mortality issues yet, but I feel if we don't do something, that's going to become the case. There have been a few legally wild collected animals come into private collections. There were 4 or 5 Easterns that were brought in from Turkey Point in South Dade County when they built the racetrack there. They bulldozed the habitat, and Florida actually issued permits for the Eastern Indigos to be collected and the gopher tortoises to be collected. The gopher tortoises had to be repatriated to another locality, but the Eastern Indigos, they were allowed to go into the hands of a couple different zoos and a few different private collectors. So that is good news. So we do have some new bloodlines coming in. And so hopefully, we can get those introduced into the captive breeding programs that we have. And basically, the invisible arc, save these animals through captive breeding.
So I have a question on the captive breeding programs. Doing histology work while in college, I actually got what appears to be viable sperm for histological work from roadkill specimens even. So it seems like even with roadkill specimens on some snakes, I've been able to get viable sperm and do some histology work with them. And there's been some limited attempts. I think someone's done something with corn snakes for a sperm collection, and I think Thamnophis as well. But I don't know of any projects on artificial insemination.
Yes.
Any snakes. What do you think about the Eastern Indigo being a candidate for that? 'Cause it seems like if you could get sperm from a wild animal without collecting it, you could introduce them.
That has actually occurred. Project Orient has wild collected semen from wild animals and artificially inseminated, and there has been success with that. A couple of zoological entities have done the same, and there has been a degree of success with that. The trick is getting them at the correct time of year, catching animals and collecting semen at the right time of year, and introducing the semen to the female during the right time of year. Nobody does it better like the snakes themselves, but there have been a degree of success with artificial insemination. Unfortunately, in Florida, legally you can't touch these animals in the wild. So you do have to get the permits, which are not easy to get in Florida. It's funny, you can get an incidental take permit for $500 and bulldozer habitat and bury gopher tortoises and the Eastern Indigos that are in the burrows with them. But you legally can't move one off the road that's in danger of being run over. So yeah, the laws are kind of tricky. They're kind of funny. They don't always make sense. And they're supposedly there to protect the animals, but sometimes I say they're protecting them to death. So yeah, it would be great if we could do more of that, but you can't convince a wildlife officer that you're collecting semen and not taking the animal. And most of them are going to look at you funny if you try to explain that to them.
And Connor Hesington, he says hello. He's on the live chat.
Do what?
Connor Hesington, he says hello. He's on the live chat. And he wanted to
Hey, Connor.
He's watching in.
Good to hear from you.
So, Jeff, I definitely appreciate it.
Thank
And
you.
I'll probably go ahead and let's see if this mic's on. I'll go ahead and end the live stream with that, and those here at the meeting will go ahead and we'll talk and chat a little bit, and we invite you to be here next time for the next meeting. And we'll go, when we get the meeting date set, we'll do that as officers through a vote on a Facebook chat, and hopefully get that lined out for the next couple of months, and we'll go from there. But for those that tuned in or that are watching this after it's been recorded, we appreciate it, and we'll catch you next time.